Why don't you sit here like a man and answer these questions?
There was something about this to begin with.
Why don't you sit here like a man?
Sitting here,
I'm not a 110-pound woman that you can kill.
On November 16, 2017, Pierce Morgan entered the max security Blackwater River Correctional Facility in Florida to confront Mark Reby, a convicted serial killer. Now, the interview quickly descends into chaos as Morgan presses Reby on the details of his crimes and the reasons behind his retracted confessions. These are serial killers who flipped out on their interviewers.
I'm telling you because the cops let me keep killing them, Nick. Don't you get it?
Not everybody is killing 7 people. So there must have been something in you that was getting you to do
You
that.
are lost, Nick.
October 2020, Eileen Wos granted renowned documentary filmmaker Nick Broomfield her last interview. She would start the interview with a big smile, but soon transform into the monster she was, and the interview goes downhill. Now, this was conducted just a day before her execution. Wos was visibly agitated and erratic. She spoke in a rapid, disjointed manner, often veering off into rages that revealed her deep-seated paranoia. She claimed that the prison authorities were using sonic pressure to control her mind, and that they were trying to drive her insane. Her eyes darted around the room. Her body language was tense, as if she were constantly on edge. Almost every question that Nick threw at her was met with anger. Wos seemed disappointed in Nick for not understanding her position or showing any sympathy for her. At one point, Nick is trying to compare what she's saying now with what she said in the past, and Wos got upset with him.
You changed your story. I'm just trying to...
What are you talking about? Change story on what?
No, about whether it was self-defense or not.
I'm not going to say it. I'm not going to get in depth about my cases, Nick.
She accused the police and the media of conspiring against her. She believed that the authorities had known about her crimes long before her arrest and had allowed her to continue killing to make a spectacle out of her eventual capture. Now, this belief was part of a broader narrative she'd constructed, in which she was the victim of a grand conspiracy. Her accusations were delivered with a venomous intensity that expressed her deep mistrust of everyone around her. And throughout this interview, Wos would make several threatening statements. She warned that she would return after her death, implying a supernatural retribution against those she believed had wronged her. Her tone was menacing, and her words were laced with a palpable sense of rage. This defiance was a reflection of her personality, showing her refusal to accept any responsibility for her actions, and her desire to lash out at a world she felt had betrayed her. She thought an asteroid was going to hit the Earth in 2019 and wipe everyone out, and it looked like her imagination gave her comfort, giving her this false assurance that everyone criticizing her would pay dearly when this event happened. But growing up, the life of Eileen was dictated by constant struggle and abuse, before she finally gave into this murderous rage. In 1989, Eileen's life took a deadly turn. Posing as a hitchhiking prostitute along Florida's highways, she began a killing spree that would last until 1990. Her first known victim was Richard Mallory, a convicted rapist whom she claimed to have killed in self-defense. Now, this was just the beginning, because over the next year, she took out 6 more men, and every time using a .22 caliber revolver. Her victims were all middle-aged men, and their bodies were found abandoned along the highways. In her final interview, she stood her ground that her murders were not evil, but acts of good. Wos believed that she was cleaning up society and getting rid of those rapists, men who would have possibly gone on to hurt other women. As Nick continued to press her with questions that she was uncomfortable with, Wos lost her patience and demanded the interview end immediately as she walked out enraged.
We're going to have to cut this interview, Nick. I'm not going to go into any more detail. I'm leaving. I'm glad. Thanks a lot, society, for railroading my ass.
On October 9, 2002, Eileen Wos was executed by lethal injection.
Atrocious, horrendous, horrible crime.
It's atrocious from where you're looking.
It's atrocious where anybody looks.
Oh, no.
Oh, yeah, it is.
In 1986, Charles Manson granted Charlie Rose of CBS News Night Watch an interview, and it would be an epic clash between Manson and Rose as these men would try to outwit each other. March 29, 1971, Manson was convicted of first-degree murder and conspiracy to commit murder for the deaths of 7 people, including actress Sharon Tate. Initially sentenced to death, it was commuted to life imprisonment when California temporarily abolished the death penalty in 1972. Manson served his term in several prisons throughout California. He spent significant time at San Quentin State Prison, Folsom State Prison, and Cochran State Prison. He was known for being disruptive and was denied parole multiple times. During his interview with CBS, Manson exhibited a range of erratic behaviors. He often rambled incoherently, shifting between moments of calm and sudden outbursts. His piercing gaze and unpredictable demeanor made the conversation particularly unnerving. Now, his responses were filled with these cryptic and bizarre statements, often deflecting questions or even turning them into philosophical rants. Manson believed he was a victim of the system because he spent most of his childhood incarcerated. In this interview, he refuses to accept responsibility for his crimes because he was convinced it was his only path based on his traumatic experiences in prison. When asked if he cared about his victims, he pushed back, stating that he was a victim too.
So you didn't care?
Put me in a solitary confinement, break my teeth out, break my ribs, bust me up, kick me down a hole, and then come back and tell me about care. I don't know what care is, man.
You see, Charlie's life was pretty messed up from birth. He was born to a 16-year-old mother, Kathleen Maddox, who was frequently in trouble with the law and was imprisoned for armed robbery when Manson was just 5 years old. By the age of 9, Manson would start his long history of delinquency. The first time he went to juvie was for petty larceny. Over the next few years, he was in and out of various reformatories and juvie centers for crimes like burglary, armed robbery, and auto theft. He would start creating his worldview from within these facilities. He would learn tactics of manipulation and intimidation, skills he would later use to control his followers of the Manson family cult. Throughout his adulthood, he would have multiple incarcerations before his infamous involvement in the Tate LaBianca murders in 1969. It would be the Tate LaBianca murder questions that irritated Manson the most during the interview.
Murder? There's no murder.
There was a murder of Sharon Tate. Come on.
There's no murder in the Holy War, man.
Was that what? It had nothing to do with was it a holy war?
Yes,
Was Sharon Tate's murder a holy war?
The whole thing is a holy war.
August 8, 1969, a rising actress and the pregnant wife of director Roman Polanski was brutally murdered, along with 4 others at her home in Los Angeles. The interviewer Charlie Rose tries to understand why Manson felt this murder was justified, but Manson would deviate from that question and instead talk about himself or the war in Vietnam. And although Manson didn't physically participate in the killings, he directed his followers to carry out that gruesome act. Manson ordered Charles Tex Watson, Susan Atkins, Patricia Krenwinkel, and Linda Kasabian to go to the house and kill everyone there as gruesomely as possible. Upon arriving at the property, the group encountered Stephen Parent, an 18-year-old visiting the estate's caretaker. Watson shot Parent to death before the group entered the main house. Inside, they found Sharon Tate, celebrity hairstylist Jay Sebring, Wojciech Frykowski, and Abigail Folger. The victims were gathered in the living room, where Tate and Sebring were tied together with ropes around their necks. Sebring was shot and stabbed, while Frykowski and Folger attempted to escape but were chased down and killed. Sharon Tate, 8 months pregnant, was stabbed 16 times. Manson would go on to say that this horrific event was fabricated by the press.
No, this is where my thought is running, see? You guys sit down, you compute all this.
November 19th, 2017, at the age of 83, Charles Manson died of natural causes at a hospital in Kern County, California.
Why won't you talk about the 2 young dad?
It's over. Disconnect. This is over.
2008, a documentary on Arthur Shawcross was released. Now, in this documentary, the Genesee River killer reveals horrific details of his crimes, spiced up with several confrontations with his interviewer. Now, here we can see he's calm and composed, contradicting the horrific nature of his crimes. It made this interview particularly terrifying. Shawcross spoke about his murders with a disturbing level of detachment, often describing the brutal acts he committed as if they were acceptable events. April 7th, 1972, was when Shawcross started off his serial killing spree. With his first known victim, Jack Blake, Shawcross sexually assaulted and strangled him. Blake's body was found a year later in the woods. Now that same year, he takes his second victim, Karen Ann Hill. She was raped and murdered, with dirt and leaves found jammed down her throat. Shawcross wouldn't approve questions regarding these murders. They all happened in Watertown, Jefferson County, New York. When the interviewer brought up the topic of Watertown, Shawcross's attitude became hostile and threatening.
But I'm just wondering why you're prepared to talk about it and not Watertown.
I don't want to talk about it. You say one more question, I leave.
Now maybe he felt guilty that the first murders involved children, which may have triggered a different psychological response in him compared to his later victims, who were mostly adult women. For the Watertown murders, Shawcross only served about 15 years in prison. In 1987, he was released on parole. He then moved to Rochester, New York, where he resumed his killing spree. This is where he became the infamous Genesee River Killer. Now, his criminal activity spanned from 1972 to 1989, with a gruesome spree occurring between 88 and 90, when he killed at least 12 women, most of whom were sex workers. His method was pretty savage. He'd rape, mutilate, and then dump their bodies in remote areas around the Genesee River. Arthur would often try to attribute his violent tendencies and criminal behavior to his experiences as a soldier during the Vietnam War. He claimed that the horrors he witnessed and participated in during that war had this profound impact on him, which led to his later actions. The interviewer, though, wasn't buying that excuse and said that he felt Shawcross was trying to shift responsibility for his horrendous actions to the war.
Some people might say, well, isn't that just an excuse to justify killing?
You believe what you want to believe. I told you how I killed, why I killed. You don't want to believe it? That's up to you.
Now, Shawcross made several disturbing claims about his time in Vietnam, although many of them were later found to be exaggerated or entirely fabricated. He boasted about committing horrific acts like banging Vietnamese women and nailing their heads to trees as a warning to the Viet Cong. He claimed that he performed a little cannibalism as well. Despite these gruesome stories, military records show that Shawcross never actually saw combat. He served as a supply and parts specialist, a non-combat role, and his claim of high kill counts and cannibalism weren't supported by any evidence. This fabrication was likely a part of his attempt to create a more fearsome persona and to rationalize his later violent behavior. And throughout the interview, Shawcross was constantly asked the forbidden question about what happened in Watertown, and it would seem like he got tired of that question as he walks out of the interview.
Why won't you talk about the two young dads?
It's over. Disconnect. This is over.
November 10th, 2008. Arthur Shawcross died while serving his prison sentence at Sullivan Correctional Facility in Fallsburg, New York. He was 63 at the time of his death.
You didn't kill 13 people.
And that's it. Thank you.
August 1985. Richard Ramirez, the Night Stalker, made a crucial mistake that led to his capture. While in prison, he granted an interview that scared the crap out of everyone watching it, including the journalist interviewing him. Now here we see Ramirez having a cold, unflinching gaze that unnerved even the most seasoned journalists and law enforcement officers. His eyes, described as lifeless and devoid of empathy, seemed to pierce right through anyone who dared to question him. Now in this particular interview, Ramirez plays cat and mouse with the journalist, trying to deflect questions. It becomes evident that he's only acting out a script, and his answers were well rehearsed, which made him sound empty. It's believed that the Night Stalker was responsible for at least 13 deaths, but getting him to admit it was frustrating.
You didn't kill 13 people.
Again, it would be improper for me to comment in any regard to that question.
August 30th, 1985. His name and photograph was released to the public. The following day, Ramirez was spotted in East LA, and a chase ensued. As he attempted to steal a car, he would be surrounded by a crowd and beaten until police arrived. Ramirez was as terrible as any other criminal could be. He committed his first known murder, raping and stabbing a 79-year-old widow. But this brutal act was just the beginning, because over the next year, Ramirez goes on to kill 13 people, though some say that number's a bit higher, ranging from ages 9 to 83. And his methods were as varied as they were gruesome. His crimes were characterized by extreme violence and even sadism. He used a variety of weapons, including knives, guns, a tire iron, and even a machete. He often tortured his victims before killing them, and many were sexually assaulted. Ramirez left satanic symbols at many crime scenes, further adding to the terror he inspired. And when asked why he was this way, his answer was chilling, and he subtly snapped at the interviewer.
I'll tell you what, I gave up on love and happiness a long time ago.
Why?
I don't care to explain that.
Ramirez frequently made references to Satan and his belief in the dark forces that he claimed guided his actions. He goes on to say that everyone's evil in some way or another, acknowledging his own evil nature, while suggesting that it was a universal trait. He also tries to control the narrative and provoke reactions from his interviewer, even going as far as saying he's evil but not 100% evil, as if that's a commendable trait he should be praised for. When he realized all his tactics weren't working, Ramirez got fed up and tried to walk out of that interview, even pushing the camera out the way.
You're entitled to your opinion, and that's it. Thank you.
Boy, grass outside for the camera. Good.
The manipulative nature and dark charisma he displayed in this interview played a significant role in this phenomenon. He had a brooding, mysterious persona, often seen wearing dark clothes and sunglasses, which seemed to captivate certain individuals. His defiant and theatrical behavior in court, like flashing a pentagram drawn on his palm and shouting "Hail Satan," only added to his dark allure. One of his most notable admirers was Doreen Loy, a freelance magazine editor. Loy began writing to Ramirez after seeing him on TV following his arrest, and over the years, she sent him 75 letters, firmly believing in his innocence, despite the overwhelming evidence to the contrary. Now, their correspondence eventually led to a relationship, and they would also get married in a ceremony at San Quentin State Prison. On June 7, 2013, Ramirez died of complications related to B-cell lymphoma while still awaiting execution.
I think these families of these women, they need That's it. Justice.
Captain, we're done.
Why can't you answer these questions?
I answered your question.
Huh?
You want to get this off?
Why are you running away?
November 16, 2017, Mark Reby was interviewed by controversial TV host Piers Morgan. Tensions would escalate when Reby, visibly agitated, accused Morgan of trying to manipulate him, and the confrontation only got worse. August 6, 1989, Donna Callahan, a 29-year-old pregnant woman who vanished from her job at a convenience store in Gulf Breeze, Florida, led to the arrest of Mark Reby, and the evidence against him is rooted in this tragic disappearance. 1996. A breakthrough came after many years of the case being unsolved. Reby's half-brother, William Alex Wells, who was serving a 30-year sentence for an unrelated robbery, confessed to a fellow inmate about his involvement in Callahan's murder. Now, this inmate informed authorities, which led to Wells' cooperation with the police. Wells revealed that he and Reby had abducted Callahan, and Reby had strangled her in the backseat of their car. Wells led police to the location where they buried Callahan's body. This crucial evidence, combined with Wells' testimony, allowed police to arrest Reby and charge him with murder. Reby had initially confessed to the murder, but would later claim that he only confessed because police had tricked him. It was this allegation that led up to the Piers Morgan-Mark Reby interview, which remains one of the most intense and unsettling moments in true crime television. It all starts off like any normal interview. Two men exchanging pleasantries like gentlemen, and Reby settles down in his seat hoping to control the conversation in his favor. He makes a mistake, though, of underestimating the adamant nature of Piers Morgan, and he would soon get a reality check. The first hurdle Reby had to deal with was his lies about the evidence the police had. Reby was trying his best to discredit Special Agent Haley, the police officer who headed the investigation. Piers Morgan wasn't having any of that, and continued to press him on the matter.
Special Agent Haley's position about this is that in the 8 cases that I went through in detail...
Keep going with Special Agent Haley. I've done explained to you.
You mentioned him too.
1998. Mark Reby was convicted of first-degree premeditated murder and sentenced to 25 years to life in prison. During the trial, we see the true extent of his depravity. While in prison, Mark confessed to the murders of 13 women, all along Florida's Gulf Coast. These confessions would reveal a man who had been using the Panhandle as his personal hunting ground, preying on vulnerable women. The details he provided were stuff only the killer would know. Special Agent Haley was the one who recorded these confessions and is now the bone of contention in this interview, as Reby seemed to be highly irritated anytime the name of that officer was mentioned. So during this intense argument, Pierce is determining to uncover the truth about Ryby's alleged crimes. And despite Ryby's retractions and claims of innocence, Morgan was unrelenting. He directly confronted Reby, damning the consequences. That unwavering stance created a highly charged atmosphere, with Reby becoming increasingly agitated.
I see, Mark, I don't believe you. I don't believe you.
I don't care.
I think you are a serial killer.
You're wrong.
After the argument, both men try to cool down, but it was short-lived, and within a few seconds, the interview goes into more chaos. And this time it was final. There was no way of salvaging the situation. And Pierce Morgan seemed to have had enough too.
I think these families of these women, they need
That's it.
justice.
Captain, we're done.
Why can't you answer these questions?
I answered your question.
Huh?
You want to get this off?
Why are you running away?
At this point, it was clear that all Reby wanted was to get away from this interview. But Pierce, on the other hand, capitalizes on the situation to berate the serial killer and even taunt him.
Why don't you sit here like a man and answer these questions?
There was something about this to begin with.
Why don't you sit here like a man?
Sitting here, nothing.
Today, Mark Reby remains behind bars.
You got me annoyed with you now.
Yeah.
That's the truth.
How mad are you?
How bad? Pretty.
1986. Richard Kuklinski, known as the Iceman, the most notorious and feared contract killer in American history, was arrested. His crimes were bone-chilling, but nothing like his cold voice and subtle threats during his interview. Richard's criminal career began with petty theft and would escalate more seriously. By the 1960s, he was deeply involved in organized crime, working for several mafia families, including the Gambino and DeCavalcante organizations. Now, his reputation for efficiency and brutality would grow, and he became a sought-after hitman. Richard's methods were varied and gruesome. He used knives, guns, poison, and even his bare hands to eliminate his targets. 1985. Richard's notoriety reached new heights. He earned the nickname the Iceman after authorities discovered he had frozen the body of one of his victims to obscure the time of death. His victims included business associates, rivals, and even friends who he believed might have betrayed him. Now, while in prison, he gave numerous interviews, revealing the extent of his crimes and his unrepentant nature. He spoke with a chilling detachment about the murders, showing no remorse for his actions. In one of the interviews, they tell him that his moods changed, and there was a look of resentment on his face. Richard's bad temperament was one of the triggers that made him kill. He was easily irritable, and saying the wrong things could trigger his desire to murder. Now he had this raging desire to snuff life out of his interviewer. But even more chilling is his openness about it when questioned. Now the interviewer wants to know what set off his rage at that moment.
Did you feel I was criticizing you?
Yes,
Is that what did it?
I think so. I think that's the part that did it.
Kuklinski's relationship with his father, Stanley, was a significant factor in shaping his violent and unhinged nature. Stanley Kuklinski was an abusive alcoholic who subjected Richard to relentless physical and emotional abuse. This would instill a deep-seated hatred in Richard from a young age. And Stanley's abuse wasn't limited to just beatings. He killed Richard's older brother, Florian, by pushing him down the stairs. And that single traumatic event fueled Richard's anger and resentment further. So growing up in such a hostile environment, Richard had to learn to suppress his emotions and develop a hardened exterior to survive. March 5th, 2006, the Iceman died in Trenton, New Jersey.
Did she give birth to a baby?
You know, you push and you look.
On November 17, 1987, Tommy Lynn Sells beat a pregnant woman to death. This incident became a taboo topic for Sells. And when he was asked about it in an ABC News interview, Tommy showed a terrifying reaction, leading to the point of threatening the life of the interviewer. Now, Tommy's criminal activities began early. At around 13, he was banned from his grandmother's house after crawling into her bed naked. This would lead to his whole family kicking him out, leaving him to fend for himself. And by 14, he was living like a nomad, hitchhiking and train hopping across the U.S. In 1979, Tommy would commit his first murder when he was just 15. He claimed to have killed a man who had offered him a ride, and this marked the beginning of a killing spree that would span 2 decades and multiple states. He would break into homes, attacking his victims with whatever weapon was at hand. In 1992, he attacked 19-year-old Fabian Witherspoon, who managed to fight back and survive actually, leading to Cell's arrest for malicious wounding. However, this wouldn't stop him. After 5 years of prison, he was back on the streets, continuing his killing spree. In December 1999, when he broke into the home of the Harris family in Del Rio, Texas, he brutally murdered Kayleen Harris and attempted to kill Crystal Searles, but miraculously Crystal survived and was able to identify her attacker, leading to Tommy's capture on January 2, 2000. Shortly after, Tommy was convicted of the murder of Kayleen Harris and sentenced to death. But the most terrifying act of Cell's was perhaps his attack on a family in Ina, Illinois, where he murdered the Dardeen family. He started by shooting Keith Dardeen, then beat their son to death before beating Elaine Dardeen, who was pregnant. He beat her so much that she went into labor and gave birth on the spot. Tommy then proceeded to beat the newborn as well. When the interviewer tried talking about the incident, Tommy warned him not to. The conversation ended with Tommy fantasizing about how he'd like to kill the interviewer if he had the chance to.
What happens when my head goes down to the concrete?
Well, what do you think happened? It cracks like a coconut.
April 3rd, 2014. Tommy's executed by lethal injection. Despite his conviction for only one murder, Cell's claimed to have killed over 70 people, and authorities believe he was responsible for at least 22 murders.
I felt offended, I guess.
What were you offended by?
The terms that you use and some of the questions.
March 6th, 2018, we have Pierce Morgan again conducting a tense and chaotic interview with Lorenzo Gilliard, infamously known as the Kansas City Strangler. The interview fired up as Morgan confronted Gilliard with DNA evidence linking him to the crimes. Now, from the beginning of the interview, Lorenzo's frustration with Pierce was obvious, as Morgan presses him with pointed questions about DNA evidence and the gruesome details of the murders. Gilliard's demeanor shifts from calm to visibly agitated. His initial attempts to maintain composure quickly gave way to defensive and evasive responses. Midway through the interview, the tension reaches a boiling point. Gilliard accused Morgan of twisting his words and taking his statements out of context. He suggested that Morgan was more interested in sensationalism than in understanding his perspective. Lorenzo hints that he's considering ending the interview altogether, feeling that the conversation was becoming increasingly unfair and biased against him.
I'm going to end our conversation now because you're taking things out. No, you're taking things out of context.
Lorenzo,
I didn't apply that.
I don't think I am taking things out of context. I'm trying to work out what you're telling me.
1969. Gilliard's arrested for assaulting and raping a girl he knew, but the charges were dropped after a reconciliation agreement. Now, the pattern of violence and evasion of justice would continue throughout the early 70s, and in 1973 he was arrested for assaulting his wife, Rena Hill, who accused him of years of physical and sexual abuse. In 1977, Gilliard's violent tendencies escalated to murder. His victims were often vulnerable women, many of whom were sex workers. He would lure them, rape them, and then strangle them to death. The randomness and the brutality of his crimes just put Kansas City on edge. And despite his numerous arrests for various crimes, he managed to evade capture for the murders for decades. His ability to blend into society as this seemingly ordinary trash company supervisor really helped him avoid suspicion. 2004, thanks to the advancements of DNA technology, Gilliard was finally linked to the murders, and he was apprehended. By 2007, he was convicted of 6 counts of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The trial showed the brutal fear he would instill into his victims and the community. But during the interviews, Lorenzo's demeanor was chilling and unnerving. Despite all the things he's done, you see him as calm and composed, really only adding to the terror he invoked. He can just sit there and talk about all of this without showing any visible sign of remorse or guilt. Kinda disturbing. But Pierce over here wasn't buying any of it. Morgan, who's interviewed numerous criminals, pointed this out. You see, Lorenzo's behavior during interviews often showed psychological manipulation. He would attempt to present himself as this victim of wrongful accusations, really trying to invoke sympathy from his interviewers, and despite the overwhelming evidence, he vehemently denies any involvement, claiming ignorance about how his DNA was found on the victims. Morgan's over here relentlessly questioning, trying to uncover the truth behind his motivations and actions. But this serial killer's evasive responses and steadfast denials only added to the interview's chaotic atmosphere. Then, Morgan snapped and confronted Lorenzo even more directly. At this point, Gilliard, visibly angered, abruptly stands up and demands to be taken back to his cell.
Do you think I'm an idiot, Lorenzo? Do I look an idiot to you?
Can I go back?
For a moment, he stood there, glaring at Morgan with a look of disdain, clearly fed up with the direction of the interview. The atmosphere charged with hostility as he makes it clear he's done with the conversation. After a tense pause, he turns and walks away, leaving Morgan and the viewers with a chilling reminder of what happens when you confront a convicted serial killer.
Have a good day, y'all. Thank you.
Lorenzo Gilliard continues to serve his life sentence without the possibility of parole at Crossroads Correctional Center in Cameron, Missouri.